can see my face and live, and yet Moses knew God face to face. Contradiction? Clever wordplay? Or pathway to some pretty cool spiritual stuff? Welcome, Bruchim Abim, Chag Semeyach. I'm Rabbi Paul, your virtual rabbi, and you have found Beit Virtuali. Let's stir up a little Chag Torah together. So this is a bit of a part 2 for the sermon that I gave for Shabbos last week in Ki Tisa, which is part of what we are reading for the Shabbat Chol HaMoed Sukkot. So the Shabbat in the middle of the Sukkot holiday, we read the very famous verse after Moses is bargaining with the Eternal that no one can see my face and live, after Moses wishes to see the presence of the Eternal. And now during Simchat Torah, I am pre-recording this and auto-posting this on the Chag, that Moses was the greatest of all prophets, for Moses knew God face to face. So this is a part 2, although it can and is meant to stand alone if you want to see the initial meditations that brought this about. First link down below. But let's look at these two verses side by side. First of all, we have from chapter 33 of the book of Exodus, Shemot, verse 20. Vayomer lo tuchal lirot et panai, ki lo yirani ha'adam v'chai. And the Eternal continued speaking, but you cannot see my face, for a human being may not see me and live. And now the second reading from Deuteronomy 34, verse 10. This is from Parshat V'zot HaBracha. This is the reading for Simchat Torah. Ve'lo kam navi od b'Yisrael k'Moshe, asher yad'o Adonai panim el panim. Never again did there arise in Israel a prophet like Moses, whom the Eternal singled out face to face. Some interesting translations in this, the modernized, the 21st century version of the JPS. First of all, the biblical expression for you cannot see is lo tuchal le'ot, which means you can't digest it. It's just pretty cool, but it shows an interesting subtlety in what we're talking about. It's not talking about ability. It's something that in some way we can do, but if we do it, we can't tolerate it, right? I can quite easily and heartily eat an entire pizza. Not going to tuchal it very well. I'm not going to digest it very well. I will pay a price. I can do it. I have the ability. But the act of doing is something that causes me a bit of a downfall. And likewise, the translation of singled out face to face. The Hebrew is asher yad'o Adonai panim el panim. Yad'o knew him. This is again the biblical no. It's the same no that is used for, and Abraham knew his wife. We have to remove ourselves from all of our puerile interests that come from being English speakers, and those of us who are Americans who grew up in a country that was founded by Puritans, partially, right? I'm living in a country now where talk about sexuality is relatively self-evident. It's not how it was where I grew up. We giggle and we cannot deal, even as adults sometimes, with this verb, with comparing this. When we see that Abraham knew Sarah, there's something being said that is more interesting than Abraham had sex with Sarah. And bringing sexuality into this panim el panim, this face-to-face comment, is not at all what's being said. We are stuck in an English mindset, and those of us from the States are stuck in a post-puritanical mindset. This is a discussion of intimacy, but of intimacy of a completely different sort. Let me tell you about a few of the times that I've experienced yada'at, for what this kind of intimacy is. I think the very first time I experienced it was in the performance of Johannes Brahms' Ein Deutsches Requiem at the University of Montana. We had lost a professor to AIDS, and the civic orchestra and the university orchestra and all the local choirs got together and performed this, and we were all in tears. And the performance was an amazing performance. And we, through the reason we were playing it, in honoring a great educator, someone who inspired us all, but also the zeitgeist in the early 90s of losing someone local in Montana to AIDS. We were all broken, and we were playing something about brokenness. And in the process of doing so, and I still talk to some people who were in that today, and some of you who are watching these videos, if you were in that performance, please reach out, let me know what your experience was. But many of us were in tears. Many of us talked afterwards that we had a mystical experience, that sometime in the middle of all that, the stage, us, our instruments, our voices shrunk to the size of nothing, and we expanded in the twinkle of an eye to the size of the universe. We understood something. We knew yada'at, something that we didn't know before, and there are no words that can describe it. We became a part of the music. We cleaved to the music. Therefore, man shall leave his father and his mother and shall cleave Yada'at, his wife, and the two shall become one in flesh. The physicality involved is only a part of what Yada'at is about. Yeah, most of these analogies are going to be through music. The second was the performance of my own German-style Requiem Mass when I was a senior in college. And then there have been a few jazz performances where in that solo, in that instance, and yes, this is happening through music. There's a reason that music is so powerful, and the reason that music exists at a mystical level within Judaism because it is one of the gateways through which we can feel all boundaries fall down. Guess what another of those gateways is? Sexuality. It's one of the ways that most people can touch eternity. Why? Because it's one of those few moments where, not for everyone, but for many people, it might be the only experience where the ego walls, even for a heartbeat, the twinkling of an eye, fall apart. The knowing is not the sexual act. The knowing is the ego falling apart and us not having barriers with something greater than us, even for the tiniest amount of time. And so when we see this idea of we can't digest seeing, but there was at least one in our tradition who knew, this is the great mystery that's not even that hidden. Let me try it another way, using a little wordplay that was first introduced to me by Rabbi Josh Franklin. If you're in his congregation, give a shout out. He is one of the great rabbis in the United States and really fine intellect. And in his master's thesis about Leo Beck, he talks about the difference between knowledge and understanding. And in this case, knowledge and understanding in English don't map directly onto the concepts in Hebrew, but there's a difference between being told something, reading something, having a fact come into us. That's kind of the lirot. And then actually knowing that that's true, the full understanding of the moment. Perfect example might be you can read 1,000 books about what it's like to be married, and none of them actually tells you what it's like to be married until you are actually married, until you're actually in a partnership. It's one of the reasons that so many marriages break apart, because the expectations that come through the seeing, what we engage with our eyes, is radically different than what it means when the tachlis is down, when our everyday and every moment are dependent on our ability to negotiate with another who is not us, is not an extension of our ego, no matter how much we might wish that to be. And hopefully we don't, because it's a really, really bad idea. But the reading of a thing is not the being or the doing or the understanding a thing. And so the first level to look at this difference between no one can see my face and live and Moses knew the eternal face to face is that very difference. Listen, Moses, I could show you the truth of the universe. I could show you the reasons behind halakha, behind Jewish law, behind the revelation on Sinai. I could show you what it's leading you to, but it's not going to mean anything to you. We actually see this in Midrash, but the Midrash reflecting the Moses at the end of that 40 years, the long time, the time that it goes from the Moses who cannot see something, the Moses who would even think that he could see something, that would even ask that question, to a Moses who is asking a different series of questions. And in the Midrash, we have this idea that Moses, coming towards the end of his life, is wanting to know, like all of us, that our lives meant something, that after we're gone, that there'll be some reflection of who we are as a person. And so the Eternal takes him, says that, hey, there's going to be this guy, Rabbi Akiva, who's going to get so much out of your word, so much out of Torah, that he's going to find things that no one ever found before, and even the smallest portions of what's been written there, and the tiniest vowels, the points that are put onto the text. And so Moses goes and he sits in a back row of the class and listens to Akiva talking, and he doesn't understand anything. He doesn't recognize anything. And then Akiva asks one of the students, how do we know that this is right, that this is halakha? And the answer is because this was taught to Moses on Sinai. Even though Moses doesn't recognize this, in the Midrash, Moses' answer is, that's good enough for me. The acknowledgement that this is part of the continuum of what he experienced was good enough for him. That was not good enough for him at the beginning. Here's the difference between lirot, lo tuchal lirot, no one can see my face, digest, no one can tolerate that. We can't tolerate because we don't have the information yet. And what happens at the end, after we've got that greater perspective, when we're able to put it together, the sum of the wisdom that we have in our lives. If when I'm young and I'm going to live to a very old age, if I ask to see my legacy, if I ask to see the tapestry of my life laid out in front of me, to see the face of God as it were, I'd stop. I wouldn't even try, because included in that is every bit of pain that I had to go through to get to this point right now. And as I'm not at an end point, every point that's going to come after that, because I know the pain doesn't end, that's part of life. Baruch Hashem, we get the moments of happiness and joy and togetherness, but it's all punctuated with these moments. And if that's what we saw, we can't digest that. It's the same way that when we stub a toe, we forget the physical pain. We are programmed, we evolved to forget the pain. Why? Because if all we were the memories of each of our pains, we will not continue the next day. And as we're looking out across the tapestry of our life, if we're seeing lirot, the face of God, the life as we can understand it, what do we think we're going to focus on? What in that moment, if we are still thinking that seeing all of our life, seeing the truth of our life is a good thing, if we don't have enough maturity to know that that's not a question that we should ask, then are we going to focus on all the moments of victory and take that away? No, we are going to look at the pain, and we cannot live with that. Lo tuchal panai v'chai. But when we've gotten past the need to ask that question, and we're just having that slim bit of hope that my legacy might mean something. Well, why was Moshe Rabbeinu? Because when he was taken in this midrashic narrative to a place where he didn't recognize anything, the knowledge that it was part of what came from him, even if he didn't recognize it, was good enough. When we want to see the fullness of truth of the universe, it's not good enough for us. When a child is born, most people want to see themselves reflected in that child. And the more that child, for most human beings, moves away from our own ego, the more we try to clasp them in so that they are safe. What does safety mean? Just like us, not doing anything that we don't understand. However, when you look from the other side, the child that has grown up and had a successful life, if the question you're asking is only to see yourself in that person, you will be miserable, because the success that they've experienced in life might just be in spite of us instead of because of us. We cannot see that truth from a certain time and perspective. But if in the end what's important to us is my child's effective, my child has had a life, their own life, a life of individuality and individuation. If that's what we're able to see, even if we don't recognize ourselves, we are satisfied. That's our difference between Moses at the beginning of the 40 years and the Moses at the end. Which brings us to our questions for the Simchat Torah then. And this is tying back to the sermon that I just gave, again, first link down below. When we're about to enter into any door into the unknown, what questions are we asking? Last week was about the bargaining that we had with the universe. I won't go through unless I have guarantees. Those guarantees are lirot. What am I going to see? And I mentioned that the mystery is that God indeed promises Moses that God will lead. But how? And the verse from Exodus says that my face, panai, will go and precede you. The face has two verbs associated with it. The attempt to see the face, which is not possible, and the attempt to yada'at, to understand the face, which is the experiential. Walking through the door simultaneously has no promises and is required. We actually don't want to know what happens next. We will give up before we even try if we know what happens next. And that's not defeatism. That's because if we know what comes next, we will focus on the pain instead of the joy that binds it together. Knowing God, panim el panim, face to face, is taking on the courage of walking through the door regardless of not seeing what's there. Because only through that door am I not controlling my child. Am I not controlling my partner? Only through that do I actually get these equal dialogues in my life. And I'm certainly not able to control the universe. Because quite frankly, which of us has a vision that is going to make the universe perfect? Which of us actually wants to have the chutzpah to say it's our wisdom that should be followed by God? And to, with a pun intended, bring this full circle. At the end of this Torah reading, we start again with Bereshit Bara Elohim. In a time of beginning, God created the possibility of all that comes after. We start a new cycle. We go through this again, and why do we do it? Because we are not ready to see. We can't. And we're working towards knowing, and it's going to take yet another cycle through all the iterative questions that we have in our tradition, through all the holidays, to once again take off another layer of the people that we haven't forgiven, or the people that we need to ask forgiveness when we get around to the next Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah, to find out what our addictions and slaveries are as we get around to the next Passover, to ask ourselves how we're overcoming as we get to our next Hanukkahs and Purims, to see how we're moving from lifelessness to life as we go through tragedies, as we go through our next Tu B'Shavat, and to find the things that we haven't mourned as we get to our next Tisha B'Av. We start the cycle again because we are not ready to see, but we're in the process of learning, and that is actually the real journey. Any other journey that we take on, we can't digest. It's not what we're made for. But to walk hand in hand with people, communities, partners who are willing to be in dialogue with us, to challenge us, to disagree with us. That's the journey to Yida'at. That's the journey to something so much deeper than seeing, to understanding, to knowing, because in the end we don't control the outcome, but we are part of that greater tapestry. What we do matters. We just don't always get to define how it matters. Chag Semeyach, everyone. We'll see you next time. Yisrael